My daughter-in-law looked me up and down in front of the wedding cake, her white gown sparkling under the ballroom lights, and said, "Move away from the cake table, you fat pig! You're ruining my wedding photos." For 1 second, the whole room went silent. Then someone laughed. But the sound that broke me wasn't laughter. It was my son Daniel's silence. He stood close enough to hear every word, and he still lowered his eyes. I was about to walk out when the ballroom doors opened and Edward Grant, the millionaire investor, Madison's father, recognized instantly, walked straight past the bride and stopped in front of me. "Mrs. Hill," he said, "the acquisition is complete. If this story touches something in your heart, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And wherever you're watching from tonight, write your city and the time. I always love knowing who is sitting with me through these stories. My name is Chloe Hill, and before anyone ever whispered my name in a boardroom, before anyone connected me to a private investment fund or a signed acquisition deal, I was just Daniel's mother. That was how I thought of myself for most of my life. Not rich, not powerful, not impressive, just a mother. I was 66 years old when Madison Blake called me that terrible name at her wedding. But the story did not begin in that ballroom. It began decades earlier in a small yellow house on the edge of a quiet town in Ohio, where I raised my son with one paycheck, 2 tired hands, and a heart that refused to give up. I had been a 3rd grade teacher for almost 30 years. My classroom smelled like pencil shavings, glue sticks, old library books, and sometimes peanut butter sandwiches children forgot inside their desks. I loved teaching. I loved watching children sound out words for the first time, loved seeing shy little faces brighten when they realized they were smarter than they had believed. But I will not pretend my life was easy. My husband, Thomas Hill, died when Daniel was 8 years old. One ordinary Tuesday morning, Thomas kissed me goodbye in the kitchen, told Daniel to finish his cereal, and promised he would fix the loose porch step when he came home. He never did. A heart attack took him before lunch. By dinner, I was a widow, and my little boy was sitting on the floor of our hallway, clutching his father's baseball cap like it was the only thing keeping him attached to the world. I remember kneeling beside him, though my own knees were shaking, and promising him, "We are going to be okay." I did not know if that was true, but mothers say things before they know how to make them true. After Thomas died, life became a long season of doing what had to be done. I taught school during the day. I graded papers at night. I tutored children on Saturdays. During the summers, I worked at the local library and sometimes helped run reading programs just to bring in extra money. There were evenings when I ate toast for dinner so Daniel could have chicken. There were winters when I wore the same old coat with a missing button because Daniel needed new boots. There were birthdays when I smiled through my exhaustion while stretching $20 into a cake, a gift, and a little party for his friends. Daniel never knew the half of it. I made sure of that. He knew we were not wealthy, of course. Children notice when other families take vacations and yours does not. They notice when their sneakers come from clearance racks and their classmates wear the newest kind. But I never wanted Daniel to feel poor in his spirit. I never wanted him to feel less than anyone else. So our home was full of books, music, soup on the stove, and Sunday pancakes. We did not have much, but I tried to make what we had feel warm. Daniel was a sweet boy. Quiet, thoughtful, always watching people's faces. He had Thomas's serious brown eyes and my habit of worrying over everyone. When he was little, he used to bring me dandelions from the yard, and placed them in jelly jars on the kitchen windowsill. When I grow up, he once told me standing on a chair because he wanted to help wash dishes. I'll take care of you, Mom. I laughed and kissed his forehead. You just grow up kind. That will be enough. And for a long time, he did. He held doors open for elderly neighbours. He shoveled snow from Mrs. Patterson's walkway without being asked. He worked hard in school, not because I pushed him cruelly, but because he understood that education was the ladder I was trying to hold steady for him. When Daniel got accepted to Ohio State, I cried in the kitchen after he went to bed. Not because I was sad, because I was relieved in a way only a parent can understand. I had carried fears for so long that my body did not know what to do when hope finally arrived. Paying for college was another mountain, but somehow we climbed it. Scholarships helped, student loans helped, my extra work helped. I sold Thomas's old truck, the one I had kept too long, because grief makes you cling to metal and leather as if they can breathe. I told Daniel the truck was costing too much to maintain. I did not tell him I cried after signing the papers. That was motherhood to me. Giving quietly, bleeding invisibly, smiling so your child does not feel the cost of your sacrifice. Daniel became a software engineer. The first time he called and said, "Mom, I got the job," I sat down on my kitchen floor and thanked God out loud. He moved into a nice apartment in Columbus. He bought new shirts that did not come from discount bins. He started using words like equity package and project launch and performance bonus. I was proud of him, not because he made money, because he had become the kind of man Thomas and I had prayed he would become. Responsible, gentle, hard-working. For years, Daniel called me every Sunday night. Sometimes he came over for dinner. He would sit at my little kitchen table, too tall now for the chair he had used as a boy, and tell me about his work while I packed leftovers for him in plastic containers. You don't have to send me home with food. Every time he would say, "Yes, I do," I would answer. "It's in the mother contract." He would laugh, and for those moments, I felt that life had been kind after all. Now, I need to tell you something important. There was a part of my life Daniel did not know about. Thomas had been a practical man, but he had one small adventurous streak. Years before he died, one of his college friends started a little educational technology company. Nothing glamorous, just software to help children improve reading skills. Thomas believed in it because he believed in teachers, and he believed in me. He invested a small amount of money we barely could afford at the time. I fussed at him for it. I will admit, I told him we needed a new washing machine more than we needed some imaginary future business. He just smiled and said, "Chloe, one day, this might help you." After he died, I forgot about those shares for a while. Grief does that. It narrows your world down to bills, meals, laundry, and surviving the next hour. But years passed. The little company grew. Then it grew again. Then one day, long after Daniel had left for college, a letter arrived that changed my life so quietly, I almost did not understand it. The company was being acquired. Thomas's small investment had become something enormous. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily, patiently, like a seed buried so deep no one remembers planting it until a tree stands over the roof. I did not run out and buy diamonds. I did not move to a mansion. I did not tell Daniel. Maybe some people will think that was wrong. Maybe they will say a mother should share everything with her child. But I had my reasons. I had seen money change people. I had seen families become hungry-eyed around inheritance status and comfort. And Daniel was still building himself, I wanted him to become a man with roots, not a man waiting for a windfall. So I stayed in my yellow house. I kept teaching until retirement. I drove the same sensible car. I wore cardigans from department store sales. And quietly, with the help of a careful financial advisor named Edward Grant, I learned how to manage what Thomas had accidentally left behind. Over time, that money became more than security. It became a way to do good. I began investing mostly anonymously in small companies that had potential, but needed guidance structure or rescue. I liked helping businesses that employed ordinary people: secretaries, warehouse workers, lab assistants, customer service representatives. People whose paychecks mattered to families like mine had once mattered to ours. But to the world outside that private circle, I was still Chloe Hill, retired teacher, widow, mother, a soft-bodied woman with grey in her hair and comfortable shoes on her feet. And I was content with that. I did not need anyone to know, especially not Daniel. Then one spring afternoon, Daniel called me with a brightness in his voice I had not heard in years. "Mom," he said, "I met someone." I smiled before I even knew her name. "Tell me about her. Her name is Madison Blake," he said. "She's incredible, smart-driven, beautiful. She runs her own cosmetics company in Chicago. I think you're really going to like her." I stood in my kitchen stirring a pot of vegetable soup, listening to my son sound hopeful, nervous, alive. And because I loved him more than I feared change, I chose to be happy. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I told him. "I can't wait to meet her." I meant every word. I did not know then that Madison Blake would look at me and see an embarrassment. I did not know she would slowly teach my son to look away from me. And I certainly did not know that one day in a ballroom full of flowers and champagne, she would call me a fat pig, without realizing that the woman she was humiliating had just become the owner of everything she thought made her powerful. The first time I met Madison Blake, I wore a pale blue cardigan, a simple pearl necklace, and the kind of nervous smile a mother wears when she wants very badly to love the woman her son loves. Daniel had chosen the restaurant himself. It was one of those places in downtown Columbus where the lighting was soft. The plates were too large for the portions, and the menu used words I had only seen in cooking magazines. He told me Madison liked elevated dining, and I said that sounded lovely, though privately I hoped there would be something on the menu I could pronounce without embarrassing myself. I arrived 15 minutes early. That is a habit from my teaching days. A teacher learns that being late can unravel a whole room. So I sat near the window, hands folded over my purse, watching strangers pass outside in the evening light. When Daniel walked in, my heart lifted the way it always did. He was wearing a navy blazer, freshly shaved his hair, combed more carefully than usual. He looked happy, not just pleased or comfortable, but lit from the inside. Then Madison came in behind him. She was beautiful. I will never deny that. She had smooth honey brown hair swept over one shoulder, clear skin, sharp cheekbones, and a smile that looked practiced enough to belong on a magazine cover. Her white dress was simple but expensive, in that quiet way wealthy women understand. The gold bracelet on her wrist caught the light every time she moved her hand. Mom, Daniel said, almost breathless, "This is Madison." I stood up too quickly and nearly bumped the table with my hip. Madison noticed. Her eyes flickered down for half a second, just long enough to make me aware of my own body, then returned to my face with a polished smile. "Mrs. Hill," she said, extending her hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you." "Please call me Chloe," I said. "I've heard so much about you." "All good, I hope." She laughed softly. Daniel pulled out her chair before he pulled out mine. It was a little thing, a tiny thing, something I told myself not to notice. But mothers notice everything! At first dinner went well enough. Madison talked about her company, Lumière Cosmetics, with the confidence of a woman who knew how to make people listen. She described luxury skincare, clean ingredients, brand positioning, investor confidence, and market expansion. I did not understand every business term, but I understood passion. I had seen it in children who loved science fairs, in parents who worked 3 jobs to give their kids a chance, and in my late husband Thomas when he spoke about education. That sounds like an incredible amount of work, I said sincerely. Madison tilted her head, smiling. It is. But I've always believed some women are meant to build bigger lives than the ones they were handed. There was nothing wrong with the sentence exactly. Still, something about the way she said it made me feel as if she had glanced around my life and found it small. Daniel beamed at her. Madison started everything herself. She's amazing. I'm sure she is, I said. Madison reached for her water glass. Daniel told me you were a teacher. I was. 3rd grade mostly. How sweet, she said. Not admirable, not meaningful. Sweet. I had heard that tone before. People used it when they wanted to make kindness sound simple, when they wanted to shrink a lifetime of work into something soft and harmless. I loved it, I said. Children at that age are still honest enough to surprise you. Madison smiled again. I imagine it takes a lot of patience. I don't think I could spend all day with sticky fingers and runny noses. Daniel laughed. I tried to laugh too, but it caught in my throat. The waiter came to take our order. Madison chose quickly, gracefully, barely looking at the menu. Daniel followed her suggestion. When it was my turn, I asked a question about one of the dishes. Madison leaned toward me, her voice light. The trout is probably safest if you're not used to this kind of food. Safest? I looked at her, wondering if she meant it the way it sounded. Daniel gave me a quick smile. The trout is good, Mom. So I ordered the trout. That was the first night I learned how Madison insulted people without leaving fingerprints. She never raised her voice. She never said anything crude. She simply placed small needles inside polite sentences. When I complimented the restaurant, she said, I'm glad you're getting to try something new. When I mentioned I had made Daniel's favorite pot roast the previous Sunday, she laughed and said, comfort food is very nostalgic, isn't it? When I told her I still lived in the same house where Daniel grew up, she said, that must be comforting staying where things never change. Each comment came with a smile. Each smile told me I would look foolish if I objected. Daniel did not seem to notice. Or perhaps he noticed and decided it was easier not to. He kept touching Madison's hand across the table, looking at her, as if she were proof that his life had finally become impressive. I watched him watching her, and I tried to swallow my unease. After dinner, Daniel excused himself to get the car from the valet stand because rain had started falling. That left Madison and me alone beneath the restaurant awning. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Madison turned to me, her smile gone just enough that I could see the woman beneath the polish. Daniel has come a long way, he said. I looked at her. Yes, he has. I'm very proud of him. You should be. Her eyes moved over my cardigan, my purse, my comfortable black shoes. He's worked hard to become someone. The words landed strangely in my chest. Become someone, as though before her, before the blazer and the upscale restaurants and the beautiful CEO girlfriend, my son, had been no one. He was always someone, I said quietly. Madison's smile returned, but not warmly. Of course. I only mean he has potential now. Real potential. He needs to keep moving forward. I felt the rain misting against my cheek. Daniel knows where he comes from. That's good, she said. As long as where he comes from doesn't keep pulling him backward. There it was. Not a misunderstanding, not nerves, not my imagination, a warning. I stared at her, and for a second I saw something hungry in her face. Not hunger for food or love, but for status, for admiration, for control. Madison Blake wanted a life that looked perfect from the outside, and she had already decided I did not match the picture. Before I could answer, Daniel pulled up to the curb. Madison's face changed instantly. The sharpness vanished. She became soft again, charming again, the woman my son adored. "Your mother is lovely," she told Daniel as he opened the passenger door for her. "Lovely." I climbed into the back seat. On the ride home, Daniel talked excitedly about Madison's company. He told me she had meetings with investors in Chicago, that her products had been featured in magazines, that she had built Lumiere Belle from nothing. "She's under a lot of pressure," he said. "Sometimes she comes off a little intense, but it's only because she's carrying so much." I looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. "Do you feel happy with her?" He smiled. I do. That was all I needed to hear, or so I told myself. A mother can convince herself to accept many things if she believes her child is happy. Over the next few months, I saw Madison more often. Family dinners, birthday brunches, short visits before Daniel drove her back to the airport. Each time she wore elegance like armor, and each time she found some new way to remind me that I did not belong in her world. At my house, she looked around my living room and said, "This is so cozy, like a time capsule." When I served homemade peach cobbler, she took one bite and said, "I wish I could eat like this and not think about it." When Daniel hugged me goodbye, she watched with a little smile and later told him loudly enough for me to hear, "Your mum is very attached to you." Attached. Not loving, not close. Attached. The word made affection sound like a disease. Still, I tried. I sent Madison a birthday card. She thanked Daniel for it, not me. I asked about her business. She answered in short, glossy sentences, as if speaking to a child. I complimented her perfume once, and she said, "It's from a boutique in Paris. Hard to find unless you know someone." The woman could turn even perfume into a locked door. But the first time I truly understood that Madison did not simply look down on me but intended to remove me was at Daniel's apartment one Sunday afternoon. He had invited me over for lunch. I brought a casserole because that is what I do. Madison was there unexpectedly sitting on the sofa with her laptop open and her heels tucked neatly beneath the coffee table. "Oh," she said when I walked in. "You brought food." Daniel took the dish from my hands. "Mom makes the best chicken casserole." Madison smiled without looking up. "I'm sure it's very comforting." There was that word again. Comforting, small, safe, unimpressive. While Daniel went to the kitchen, Madison closed her laptop and looked at me. "You know," she said, "Daniel is entering a different stage of life now. His career is growing. My company is expanding. There will be events, travel important people." "That sounds exciting," I replied carefully. "It is. But it also means he can't always be available for old routines." I knew what she meant. Sunday dinners, phone calls, leftovers, home. "Families change when people get married," I said. "They do," Madison agreed. "Healthy families understand that." Her voice was sweet. Her eyes were not. That evening, Daniel forgot to call after I got home. The next Sunday, he cancelled dinner. The Sunday after that, he said Madison had a last-minute event and he needed to be there. Little by little, the space between us widened, and Madison Blake stood in that space with a smile on her face, pretending she had not built it. What I did not know then was that Madison's perfect life was not nearly as solid as it appeared. Her company, the one she spoke of like an empire, was already beginning to crack behind the scenes. She needed investors. She needed credibility. She needed a husband who made her look grounded, loyal, wholesome. Daniel was not just a man she loved. He was a prop in the story she was selling. And I was the one piece of that story she considered too plain, too heavy, too embarrassing to keep in the frame. If you had asked me in those early months whether I believed my son would ever allow someone to disrespect me, I would have said no without hesitation. Not my Daniel. Not the boy who used to stand between me and a barking dog when he was barely tall enough to reach my elbow. Not the young man who once drove 3 hours in the rain just because I mentioned over the phone that the kitchen sink was leaking. Not the son who used to say, "Mum, nobody talks to you like that when I'm around." But people don't change all at once. They change in inches. At first, it was the phone calls. Daniel and I had a quiet ritual. Every Sunday night, without fail, he would call me. Sometimes we talked for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour. We spoke about his work, my garden, a funny story from his week, a memory from his childhood. Those calls were the thread that kept our lives woven together, even after he moved out. Then one Sunday, the phone didn't ring. I told myself he was busy. Maybe he was out with Madison. Maybe he had fallen asleep early. I did not want to be the kind of mother who panicked over one missed call. The next day, I sent a light message. "Everything okay, sweetheart? Missed our Sunday chat." He replied 2 hours later. "Hey, Mom, sorry. Madison had a late dinner with clients. I got back really tired. We'll talk soon. We'll talk soon. Not tonight. Soon." It became a pattern. Soon stretched into next week. Next week stretched into, "I'll call you when things slow down." Things never seemed to slow down. When we did talk, the conversations were shorter. "I've got a meeting early tomorrow, Mum. Madison needs me to help her with something. We're traveling this weekend." The words themselves were harmless. The tone was not. There was a distance in his voice, like he was speaking to me from the other side of a closed door. I tried to adjust. I told myself this was normal. Children grow up. They build their own lives. Mothers have to step back. But stepping back is different from being pushed out. The Sunday dinners were next. For years, Daniel came over almost every weekend. He sat at the same chair at my kitchen table, the one with the slight wobble in one leg. I would cook his favourite meals: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with a little garlic. He would eat until he was full, then lean back and say, "I don't know why I ever moved out. I lived for those moments. They were simple, but they were ours." Then one Saturday afternoon, he called. "Mum, I might not be able to come tomorrow." "Might not?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Madison has an event in Chicago. It's important. I should be there." "Of course," I said quickly, "you should go." The next weekend, he cancelled again. Then again. After the 4th time, I stopped setting the table for 2. I still cooked out of habit, but I wrapped the extra food before I even sat down to eat. It was easier that way. It hurt less than waiting and wondering. When I did see Daniel, it was often in Madison's presence. Everything felt different. He watched her constantly, as if measuring his reactions against hers. If she laughed, he laughed. If she frowned, he became serious. If she checked her phone, he lost focus on whatever I was saying. Once during a short visit, I mentioned a book I had been reading. It's about a teacher who starts a literacy program in Madison, interrupted, not rudely, but firmly. Daniel, did you see the email I forwarded about the investor meeting? Daniel turned to her immediately. No, I'll check it now. My sentence dissolved in the air between us. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, while they discussed schedules and presentations as if I were a piece of furniture. That was when I began to feel it. Not just distance, displacement. Madison did not simply want to be part of Daniel's life. She wanted to redefine it. She began making suggestions that sounded reasonable on the surface. Daniel, you should move closer to the city centre. It's more convenient for networking. Daniel, you need a wardrobe upgrade. First impressions matter. Daniel, you can't keep going back to your mum's every weekend. It looks dependent. That last word stayed with me. Dependent. Like love was something embarrassing. Like closeness between a mother and son was a flaw that needed correction. One evening, Daniel came over unexpectedly. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard his key in the door. For a moment, everything felt like it used to. I dried my hands quickly and turned with a smile. You didn't tell me you were coming, I said. I was in the area, he replied, setting his bag down. We sat at the table. I poured him a glass of iced tea. For a few minutes, we talked easily like before. Then he cleared his throat. Mom Madison thinks we should sell my apartment. The one you just bought 2 years ago, I asked. Yeah, it's not really in the right area anymore. It doesn't match where things are going. Where things are going. And where is that, I asked gently. Bigger places, better neighborhoods. People at her level don't really live there. I looked at him. Daniel, you like that apartment. You worked hard for it. I know, he said quickly, but Madison understands these things better than I do. She's in a different world. There it was again. Her world. And by extension, not mine. I nodded slowly. If it's what you want. He smiled with relief, as if I had passed a test. That night after he left, I stood in my quiet kitchen and realized something that frightened me. My son was no longer asking himself what he wanted. He was asking what Madison would approve of. The changes kept coming. Madison took control of the wedding planning completely. I found out about the venue from a forwarded email, not from Daniel. It was a resort by Lake Michigan, beautiful, expensive, far beyond anything I'd ever imagined for a wedding. I offered to help. Let me know if you need anything, I told Daniel. We've got it covered, he said. Madison has a planner. I offered again more specifically. I could help with invitations or Mom, he interrupted gently. Madison has a very clear vision. It's better if we don't complicate things. Complicate. That was what my presence had become. A complication. A few weeks later, I overheard something that confirmed what my heart had already begun to suspect. I had gone to Daniel's apartment to drop off some documents he had asked for. The door was slightly open, and I heard voices inside. Madison and a woman I later learned was her maid of honor, Alyssa Moore. I'm just saying Alyssa was laughing softly. You can't have her front and center in the photos. Madison sighed. I know, I'm already working on the seating chart. What are you going to do? Put her at one of the back tables? Madison said casually. She'll still be there, but she won't draw attention. My hand froze on the door, and during the ceremony, Alyssa asked. Madison paused. I'll make sure she's seated on the aisle, not near the front. We need clean visuals. The brand image matters. The brand image, not the family, not the love. The brand! I stepped back from the door quietly, my chest tight, my heart beating in a slow, heavy rhythm. I could have walked in. I could have confronted her. I could have told Daniel what I had heard. But I didn't, because somewhere deep inside me, I still believed that love meant endurance, that a mother's job was to absorb discomfort so her child could have peace, that if I stayed kind, stayed patient, stayed quiet, things would settle. I was wrong. The final small cut came in the mail. The wedding invitation. It arrived in a thick, elegant envelope with gold lettering. I opened it carefully, smoothing the paper with my fingertips. And there it was. Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Hill request the honor of your presence. I blinked. Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Hill. Then I saw it. My name. Claire Hill. Claire. Not Chloe. I stared at it for a long time. It was a simple mistake. A typographical error. That is what Daniel said when I called him. Mum, it's just a printing issue, he insisted. It's not a big deal, but it was. Because it told me something no apology could fix. I had become so unimportant in their world that no one had even noticed they got my name wrong. I folded the invitation carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I sat at my kitchen table alone and finally allowed myself to feel what I had been avoiding for months. I was no longer being gently left behind. I was being quietly erased. There is a particular kind of pain that does not arrive all at once. Oh, it settles in slowly, like dust on furniture you once polished every day, until one morning you run your hand across the surface and realize how much has been left untouched. That was how I felt in the weeks leading up to Daniel's wedding. Not shattered, not broken, just dimmed. Still, I refused to let that feeling define the way I showed up for my son. Whatever Madison thought of me, whatever space I had lost in Daniel's life, I was still his mother. And this was still one of the most important days of his life. So I prepared. I went shopping for a dress, something I had not done in years with any real intention. I chose a small boutique instead of a department store, thinking perhaps a quieter place would make the experience less overwhelming. The young saleswoman greeted me warmly. Looking for something special, she asked. My son is getting married, I said, and for a moment saying it out loud filled me with the same pride I had felt when Daniel first told me about Madison. That's wonderful, she said. Let's find you something beautiful. We tried several dresses, some too bright, some too tight, some that made me feel like I was pretending to be someone I was not. Eventually, I found one that felt right. It was a deep navy blue. Simple, elegant, with soft lines that didn't try to hide my body, but didn't exaggerate it either. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a younger version of myself. I saw exactly who I was, a woman who had lived, who had loved, who had endured. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled at my reflection. I'll take this one, I said. That night, I hung the dress carefully in my closet. I smoothed the fabric with my hands, imagining Daniel seeing me in it, maybe even saying, "You look nice, Mum." That was all I wanted. Not admiration, not approval from Madison, just a small moment of recognition from my son. A few days later, I attended a pre-wedding gathering at a hotel lounge in Chicago. It was not quite a formal event, more of a casual meet and greet for both families. Still, the atmosphere was polished, the kind of place where conversations floated above the surface, never quite touching anything real. Madison was there, of course. She stood near the center of the room, surrounded by her friends. Her posture flawless, her laughter measured. She wore a fitted cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. When she saw me, She smiled. That same practice smile. Chloe, she said, air kissing near my cheek without quite touching me. I'm so glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. Her eyes dropped briefly to the garment bag draped over my arm. Is that your dress for the wedding? She asked. It is, I said. I thought I'd bring it in case I needed to make any last adjustments. Madison tilted her head slightly. What color did you choose? Navy blue. There was a pause. It lasted less than a second, but I felt it. Oh, she said. That's bold. Bold! I wasn't sure how navy blue had become bold, but I let it pass. I thought it was appropriate, I said quietly. I'm sure it's fine, she replied, already glancing over my shoulder at someone else. As long as it photographs well. Photographs well. Everything it seemed had to serve the image. Linda Blake joined us then, her perfume arriving before her voice. So this is the mother of the groom, she said, looking me over as if I were an item under consideration. Yes, Madison said smoothly. Chloe, this is my mother, Linda. Linda smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. I've heard so much about you, she said. Daniel is such a grounded young man. There was something about the way she emphasized grounded that made it sound like a polite substitute for something less flattering. He's always been that way, I replied. Linda nodded. Madison has always been drawn to ambition. It's good that Daniel balances that. Balances, as if my son were a weight placed carefully to keep something from tipping over. The conversation drifted, but the tone remained the same. Polite words, sharp edges. At one point, Madison gestured lightly toward my garment bag. Do you want to show us the dress? She asked, her voice carrying just enough for a few nearby guests to turn their attention toward us. I hesitated. Something in me whispered that this was not a request, but a test. Still, I unzipped the bag. The navy dress hung there simple and unpretentious among a room full of silk and sequins. Madison leaned in, studying it. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled. It's very traditional, she said. Alyssa Moore, standing beside her, leaned closer. It looks like something my aunt wore to church, she added, laughing softly. A couple of women nearby smiled not unkindly, but not kindly either. I felt the heat rise to my face. It's comfortable, I said. Of course, Madison replied quickly. Comfort is important. There it was again. Comfort. The word she used whenever she wanted to make something sound small without saying it outright. I zipped the bag slowly, my fingers steady, even as my chest tightened. I think you'll look lovely, Daniel said suddenly, stepping beside me. I turned to him, surprised. Thank you, I said. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even a flicker of guilt. Then Madison touched his arm. Daniel, can you come help me with the seating chart? She asked. He hesitated for half a second. Then he nodded. Yeah, of course. And just like that, the moment passed. I stood there holding my garment bag, watching my son walk away from me to stand beside the woman who had just quietly humiliated me. Later that evening, I found myself standing near a tall window, looking out at the city lights. Chicago stretched beneath me, bright and distant, a place where everything seemed larger, faster, more important. Mrs. Hill, I turned. A man stood a few feet away holding a glass of water. He was older perhaps, in his late 60s, with silver hair and a calm, attentive expression. He wore a dark suit, tailored but understated. Yes, I said. Robert Blake, he introduced himself. Madison's father. Of course, I said, extending my hand. It's nice to meet you. He shook it firmly. The pleasure is mine. For a moment we stood in silence, both watching the room. You've raised a good son, he said finally. Thank you, I replied. I did my best. He nodded. I imagine you did. There was something different about him. He did not look at me the way Madison or Linda did. There was no quick assessment, no subtle dismissal. Instead, there was curiosity. Chloe Hill, he said slowly as if testing the name. It sounds familiar. I smiled politely. It's not an uncommon name. Perhaps he said, but I don't think that's it. He studied me for a moment longer. Have you ever been involved in investment work? He asked. The question caught me off guard. Investment work, I repeated. Yes. Private equity, maybe. Venture capital, something along those lines. I felt a flicker of something inside me. Recognition, caution. I was a teacher, I said gently. That was my life. He held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded. Of course, he said. Forgive me, must be a coincidence. Perhaps, I said. But as he walked away, I knew something had shifted. That Robert Blake had seen something. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to make him look twice. That night back in my hotel room, I took the navy dress out of its bag and hung it near the window. Beside it, I placed a small velvet box. Inside that box was a brooch. It was not made of diamonds or rare stones. It was simple silver with a delicate floral design that had been worn smooth in places over time. It had belonged to my mother, Grace Hill. She wore it on her wedding day. She wore it to church every Sunday. She wore it the day she told me when I was a young girl, struggling with cruel words from classmates, Chloe, never let someone else's smallness make you feel small. I had kept it all these years, and I had planned to give it to Madison. Not because she deserved it, but because I had hoped she would grow into the kind of woman who might one day understand its meaning. I picked up the brooch, turning it gently in my fingers. In the quiet of that room, I made myself a promise. No matter how I was treated the next day, no matter how invisible they tried to make me, I would not let anyone take away my dignity. Not Madison, not her family, not even my own son's silence. I placed the brooch back in its box and closed the lid. Outside, the city lights flickered. Inside, something in me steadied. I did not know yet how everything would unfold. I did not know that by the next evening, the balance of power in that wedding would shift so completely that the same people who looked through me would be forced to see me. All I knew was this: I would walk into that wedding with my head held high, and I would walk out with it still that way. The rehearsal dinner was held the night before the wedding in a private dining room overlooking the Chicago River. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights, and the reflections danced across the polished table like something out of a magazine. It was beautiful. It was also the kind of place where every detail seemed designed to remind you of your place. I arrived on time wearing a soft grey dress, and the same cardigan I always reached for when I needed comfort. The hostess led me through a narrow hallway and into the private room where conversations were already flowing and glasses were already half full. Madison stood at the center again. She always did. She greeted guests with effortless grace, touching elbows, offering quick smiles, managing attention like it was something she could hold in her hands. Daniel stood beside her, attentive, slightly tense, his posture mirroring hers more than I had ever seen before. Chloe Madison said when she noticed me, her tone warm enough to pass inspection. You made it? I wouldn't miss it, I replied. She nodded already, turning to greet someone else. I found my seat near the far end of the table. The place card read Chloe Hill, this time spelled correctly. a small victory, though it felt hollow. To my right sat a distant cousin of Madison's, a woman who introduced herself but forgot my name moments later. To my left was an empty chair, which I assumed Daniel would take. He didn't. Madison guided him gently toward a seat beside her, closer to the center, closer to the spotlight. I folded my hands in my lap and told myself it didn't matter. Dinner began with small talk, the kind that skims the surface of people's lives without ever dipping beneath. Where are you from? What do you do? How do you know the bride or groom? When it came to me, I answered simply, I'm Daniel's mother. I used to teach 3rd grade. Used to someone asked. I'm retired now. How nice, another woman said. That must be very relaxing. Relaxing. There was that word again, reshaped slightly, but carrying the same implication. That my life now was quiet, uneventful, perhaps even insignificant compared to the ambition buzzing around the table. Madison, seated several places away, caught part of the conversation. Chloe has lived a very simple life, she added, her voice floating lightly across the table. Simple. Not devoted. Not resilient. Simple. I smiled politely and lifted my water glass. The courses came one by one. Beautifully plated, carefully described by the waiter, each dish carrying a name that felt more like a performance than a meal. When the server asked if I would like wine, I shook my head. Just water, please. Madison tilted her head, watching me from across the table. No wine, she asked. It's a celebration. I'm fine with water, I said. She smiled. Of course. Old habits are hard to break. A few people chuckled softly. I kept my expression calm, but inside, I felt the familiar tightening. It wasn't just what she said, it was how easily she turned every choice I made into something small. As dinner continued, Madison shifted the conversation toward her company. We're entering a really exciting phase, she said, leaning forward slightly. There's been a lot of interest from investors recently. Robert Blake, sitting to her right, listened quietly. What kind of interest, someone asked. Strategic partnerships, Madison replied smoothly. We're being very selective. Not everyone understands the vision. She glanced around the table, letting the weight of her words settle. I've built Millionaire from the ground up, she continued. I'm not about to hand it over to someone who doesn't respect what I've created. I noticed Robert's expression shift just slightly, a tightening around his eyes. Madison didn't notice, or perhaps she chose not to. At that moment, my phone vibrated gently against my leg. I almost ignored it, but something, perhaps instinct, perhaps something deeper, made me slip it quietly from my purse and glance at the screen. It was a message from Edward Grant. My breath caught. Edward did not text casually. I opened the message under the table, keeping my movements small. The acquisition closes tomorrow morning, it read. Are you still certain you want your name kept private? For a moment, the noise of the room faded. The clinking glasses, the low laughter, the polished voices, they all slipped into the background as I stared at those words. Tomorrow morning. Everything would change tomorrow morning. For months, Edward and I had been working on the acquisition of Millionaire Cosmetics. Quietly, carefully, piece by piece. What Madison saw as growing investor interest was in truth a structured intervention. Her company was in trouble. Not publicly. Not yet. But the financial reports told a different story than the one she presented at dinners like this. Overspending, misallocated funds, a focus on image over sustainability, talented employees leaving quietly, complaints buried. I had not targeted her out of malice. I had seen a company that could be saved, and I had acted. But now, sitting in that room, listening to her mock me while unknowingly standing on the edge of losing control of everything she had built, I felt something I hadn't expected. Conflict. I had planned to remain anonymous. I had told Edward that from the beginning. I don't want it to be personal, I had said. This is business. Let it stay that way. And for a long time, it had. But now it was personal. I typed a response slowly, my fingers steady, despite the storm building inside me. Yes, I wrote. Keep it private, for now. I hesitated, then added, we'll see what tomorrow brings. I set the phone down, my heart beating a little faster. Across the table, Madison was still speaking. Some investors think throwing money at a brand is enough, she said. But real leadership requires vision, discipline, taste. I almost smiled at that. Robert shifted in his seat. Madison, he said quietly, have you reviewed all the terms of your recent agreements? She waved a hand dismissively. Of course. My legal team handles the details. I focus on the big picture. Robert's jaw tightened slightly. Details matter, he said. They do, she replied, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it. I watched that exchange carefully. Robert knew something was wrong. He didn't have the full picture, but he could sense the cracks. The dinner moved on. At one point, Madison turned her attention back to me. Chloe, she said, her voice light, but carrying, are you excited for tomorrow? Very, I replied. It's going to be quite an event, she said. A lot of important people will be there. Investors, media, contacts, industry friends. I nodded. I'm sure it will be beautiful. She smiled. I just hope everything fits together. She added, her eyes flicking briefly over me. There it was again. That subtle suggestion that I did not. I met her gaze calmly. I'm sure it will, said. For a brief moment, something passed between us. Not warmth, not understanding, recognition. She saw that I had heard every word she had said, every implication she had made, and she saw that I was not going to react. Not here. Not tonight. Daniel looked between us, unease flickering across his face. Everything okay? He asked. Of course, Madison said quickly, placing a hand over his. We're just talking. That was what she called it. When the dinner finally ended, guests began to stand chairs, scraping softly against the floor, conversations shifting toward farewells and tomorrow's plans. I gathered my purse, moving slowly, giving myself a moment before stepping back into the flow of people. As I did, Robert approached me again. Mrs. Hill, he said. Chloe, I corrected gently. Chloe, he repeated. I hope you enjoy the ceremony tomorrow. I'm sure I will, I said. He studied me for a moment as if trying to place a memory just out of reach. If there's anything you need, he added, please don't hesitate. Thank you, I replied. As I walked out into the cool night air, the city quieter now, the river reflecting scattered lights, I felt something settle inside me. Tomorrow morning, the acquisition would be complete. Tomorrow afternoon, I would walk into that wedding, not just as Daniel's mother, but as the silent force behind the future of Madison's company. I had planned to remain invisible, to let the business unfold far from family. But after everything I'd heard, everything I had endured, I began to wonder if silence was still the right choice. I stood there for a moment, looking out over the water. Then I whispered to myself softly enough that no one else could hear. Tomorrow will decide everything. And for the first time in a long while, I did not feel small. I felt ready. The morning of the wedding arrived with a kind of quiet that felt almost sacred. For a moment, before the memories of the past few weeks rushed back in, I simply sat on the edge of the hotel bed and listened to the distant hum of the city waking up. Chicago in the early morning had a softness to it. Cars moving gently, voices still low, sunlight stretching slowly across glass buildings. I held my hands together in my lap and took a breath. Today was Daniel's wedding. No matter what had happened, no matter what I had heard, no matter what I now knew about Madison and her world, that truth remained. My son was getting married, or I stood and walked toward the garment bag hanging by the window. The navy dress looked exactly as it had the night before, simple, unassuming, untouched by the tension surrounding it. Carefully, I unzipped the bag and ran my fingers along the fabric. This is enough, I whispered to myself. Not the dress, not the setting, but me. I dressed slowly, deliberately. I styled my hair the way I always had, soft and practical. I applied a little makeup, more than I usually wore, but not so much that I felt like I was hiding behind it. When I finished, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at the woman staring back. There were lines on her face. There was softness around her body. There was history in her eyes. But there was also strength. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to see it. Before leaving the room, I picked up the small velvet box from the nightstand. Inside was my mother's brooch. I opened it carefully. The silver surface caught the morning light, reflecting it in a quiet, steady way. It was not flashy. It was not modern. But it carried something far more valuable than either of those things. It carried memory. It carried dignity. I pinned it gently to my dress. "Stay with me today," I murmured as if my mother could hear me. Then I picked up my purse and walked out. The wedding was held at a lakeside resort just outside the city, a place designed to look effortless and luxurious at the same time. White flowers lined the entrance. Tall glass windows reflected the blue of Lake Michigan. Staff moved quietly in the background, adjusting chairs, checking details, making sure everything would unfold perfectly. I arrived early. Of course I did. Old habits. Inside the space was already being transformed into something beautiful. Rows of chairs faced a floral arch overlooking the water. Soft music played through hidden speakers. Everything looked exactly as Madison would have wanted, controlled, curated, flawless. Except for one thing. Me. I could feel it the moment I stepped inside. The subtle shift in attention. The way a few people glanced at me, then away. The way others smiled politely, but did not approach. I was present, but not central. Visible, but not included. I walked toward the seating area, scanning the small cards placed on each table. Family table. I found it quickly. My heart lifted just slightly. Then I saw the names. Daniel Hill, Madison Blake, Linda Blake, Robert Blake, Alyssa Moore, and several others. But not mine. I swallowed. Perhaps there had been a mistake. I checked again, moving my finger slowly across each card. No Chloe Hill. I moved on to the other tables. It didn't take long to find my name. Chloe Hill, table 14, near the back of the room, furthest from the stage, furthest from the center. I stood there for a moment, staring at the card. The paper was thick, the lettering elegant. Everything about it said care and intention, which meant this was not an oversight. It was a decision. "Excuse me," a voice said softly behind me. I turned. It was one of the event staff. "Can I help you find your seat? I found it," I replied. "Wonderful," she said, smiling. "If you need anything, please let us know." I nodded. She walked away. I remained where I was. Somewhere across the room, I heard Madison's laughter. Bright, confident, unbothered. I took a slow breath and reminded myself of something I had repeated often over the past few weeks. This day is not about you. It is about Daniel. Still, the ache settled deeper. I made my way toward the back table and sat down. The chairs were just as comfortable. The view was still beautiful, though partially blocked by taller centerpieces placed at the front tables. It was a good seat, just not an important one. Guests began to arrive in greater numbers. Conversations filled the room. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed as people took pictures near the floral arch. From my seat, I could see Daniel moving through the crowd. He looked nervous adjusting his tie, greeting guests, trying to balance the expectations placed on him. For a moment, I hoped he would notice me. That he would walk over. That he would say, "Mum, why are you sitting back here? You should be up front with us." But he didn't. He glanced in my direction once briefly. Our eyes met. He hesitated. Then Madison called his name. And just like that, he turned away. I felt something inside me shift. Not break, not collapse, but settle into a quieter, heavier place. This was not an accident. This was not confusion. This was a choice he was making over and over again. I reached into my purse and touched the edge of the velvet box, even though the brooch was already pinned to my dress. A small reminder, a grounding point. You are still who you are. You are still enough. After a while, I stood and walked toward the preparation area. I wanted to give Madison one more chance. Not because she deserved it, but because I needed to know without doubt that I had done everything I could. The bridal suite was filled with movement. Bridesmaids adjusting dresses. Makeup artists making final touches. Laughter echoing against the walls. Madison stood near the center, radiant in her gown. For a moment, I simply looked at her. She was beautiful. Perfect in the way magazines define perfection. Then she saw me. Her expression changed just slightly. Not enough for others to notice, but enough for me. "Chloe," she said, her voice controlled. "We're in the middle of preparations." "I won't take long," I replied. I reached into my purse and took out the velvet box. "I wanted to give you something I said." Madison's eyes flicked to the box. "What is it?" I opened it. The brooch rested inside, catching the light. "It belonged to my mother," I said softly. "She wore it on her wedding day. I thought, perhaps you might like to have it." For a moment, Madison said nothing. Then she leaned closer, examining it. Alyssa stepped beside her, peering over her shoulder. "It's vintage," Alyssa said. Madison straightened. "It's very kind of you." She said, her tone carefully neutral. "But it doesn't really match the look we're going for." "I understand," I said. "It's not about matching. It's about—" "I know what it's about," Madison interrupted gently. "But everything today has been curated. The jewelry, the fabrics, the colors. It all needs to align. Align!" I closed the box slowly. "Of course," I said. Madison smiled again. "Maybe another time," she added. "Another time that would never come." I nodded. "Congratulations," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked out. As I stepped back into the main hall, the music shifted slightly, signaling that the ceremony would begin soon. Guests moved toward their seats. I returned to my place at the back table. I sat down, I folded my hands, and I waited. Not for recognition, not for acknowledgement, but for the moment when everything that had been carefully hidden beneath polite words and controlled smiles would finally rise to the surface. Because deep inside, I knew something Madison did not. By the end of the day, she would see me, not as an inconvenience, not as an embarrassment, but as the one person in that room she should have never underestimated. The ceremony itself was beautiful. That was the hardest part. If everything had been ugly, if the flowers had been wilted, the music off-key, the chairs mismatched, it might have been easier to carry the weight of what I felt. But nothing was wrong. Everything was exactly as Madison had planned. The lake stretched behind the floral arch like a painting. White roses and soft greenery framed the aisle. The guests fell silent as the music shifted, gentle and emotional. From my seat at the back, I watched Daniel walk to the front. He looked nervous, but also proud. His shoulders were straight, his suit perfectly tailored, his eyes scanning the crowd just once before settling ahead. For a moment, I saw the little boy he had been the one who used to look for me in school assemblies searching for my face before he dared to step onto the stage. But this time, he didn't look for me. Or if he did, he didn't let it linger. The music changed again and everyone stood. Madison appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in white, her expression composed into something soft and almost innocent. The room seemed to lean toward her, drawn by the perfection she projected. As she walked forward, I watched the faces around me. Admiration, approval, envy. No one saw what I had seen. No one heard what I had heard. To them, she was the perfect bride. To me, she was the woman who had slowly taken my place in my son's life and reshaped it until I no longer recognized where I belonged. Still I stood when everyone else stood. I watched when everyone else watched. And when Daniel took Madison's hands at the altar, I did not look away. Because this moment, however complicated, was still his. The vows were spoken, promises made. Words about love, partnership, and respect floated through the air, landing softly on ears that did not question them. I felt something twist inside me at the word respect. But I kept my face calm. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, applause filled the space. People smiled, some wiped away tears, cameras flashed. Daniel kissed Madison. And just like that, it was done. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, stepping into a future that had been carefully staged for everyone to admire. Everyone except me. The reception began almost immediately after. Guests moved into the ballroom, a larger space filled with round tables, crystal glasses, and a dance floor waiting in the center. Music played lightly in the background, just enough to fill the silence between conversations. I returned to my seat at table 14. From there, I had a clear view of the cake. It was large white, decorated with delicate sugar flowers that looked almost too perfect to eat. It stood near the center of the room, placed where it could be photographed from every angle. Everything about it said importance. Everything about it said center. I sat for a while watching. People moved easily through the space. They greeted each other, laughed, clinked glasses. The Blake family remained near the front, surrounded by guests. Daniel stayed close to Madison, his hand always somewhere near hers, as if holding on to the role he had chosen. At one point, I stood. Not because anyone had called me, not because I'd been invited, but because I wanted just once to stand near my son in this moment. I walked slowly toward the center of the room. No one stopped me. No one guided me. I simply moved through the crowd until I reached the area near the cake. Up close, it was even more intricate than it had appeared from a distance. Tiny details carved into icing layers, balanced with precision, everything carefully designed to be seen. I stood there for a moment looking at it. Then I adjusted my dress slightly, smoothing the fabric over my hips. I did not notice Madison approaching at first, but I felt it when the air shifted. "Chloe." Her voice was low, controlled. I turned. She stood just a few feet away, her expression tight beneath her smile. "We're about to take photos," she said. "I see that," I replied calmly. Her eyes moved over me quickly, assessing. "Could you step back?" she asked. "This area is for the bridal party." "I'm Daniel's mother," I said, not raising my voice, not making a scene, just stating a fact. Something in her expression flickered. Annoyance, then something sharper. "Yes," she said. "Of course. But we need clean shots. The photographer has a plan." "Clean shots?" I understood what she meant. Still, I didn't move immediately. Not out of defiance, but because for just 1 second, I wanted to see if Daniel would step in. He stood a few feet away, speaking with someone from Madison's side of the family. He could see us. I knew he could. I met his eyes, waited, hoped. Madison followed my gaze. She saw the connection, and something in her snapped. "Move away from the cake table," she said again, her voice dropping lower, sharper. I remained still. The room was not loud enough to hide what came next. "You're ruining my wedding photos." A few people nearby turned their heads. I felt the weight of their attention. I felt the old instinct rise in me, the one that told me to shrink, to step aside, to avoid conflict. But I stayed where I was. Madison took 1 step closer, and then she said it. "Move away from the cake table, you fat pig." The words landed with a force that seemed to echo. For a second, everything stopped. The music, the movement, the easy flow of conversation. I heard someone laugh, a quick nervous sound, then another. I didn't know if they were laughing at me or at the shock of it. It didn't matter. What mattered was the silence that followed. I turned my head slowly. Daniel stood there, close enough to hear every word, close enough to see my face. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even look angry. He just, lowered his eyes. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Because I could have forgiven Madison. I could have forgiven cruelty from someone who never loved me. But I could not ignore the absence of love from someone who should have. I looked at my son, and in that moment, I realized something I had been refusing to see. He had not just changed. He had chosen. Chosen silence, chosen comfort, chosen the life Madison offered over the woman who had given him everything. I felt the sting of tears rise behind my eyes, but I did not let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. Instead, I took a small step back, then another. I reached up and touched the brooch pinned to my dress. My mother's brooch. A reminder. A promise. I unpinned it slowly, held it in my hand for a moment, then slipped it into my purse. Not as surrender, but as a decision. A quiet one. The kind that changes everything. I turned away from the cake, from Madison, from the small circle of people who had witnessed the moment and chosen not to interrupt it. I walked toward the edge of the room, each step steady, each breath controlled. When I reached the hallway just outside the ballroom, I stopped. The noise from inside softened behind the closed doors. For the first time since the words had been spoken, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of them. Not just the insult, but the truth it revealed. I took out my phone. My hands did not shake. My voice did not break. When Edward Grant answered, I spoke quietly. Edward, I said. A pause. Are you at the venue? Yes, he replied. I arrived a few minutes ago. I was waiting for your signal. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, then opened them. You can come in now, I said. Another pause. Are you sure he asked? I thought of Daniel, of Madison, of every small moment that had led to this one. Yes, I said. I'm done hiding. I ended the call. Then I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked back toward the ballroom doors. This time, not as someone hoping to be included, but as someone who no longer needed permission to be seen. When I pushed the ballroom doors open again, the music had resumed. Laughter drifted through the air, softer now, careful as if the room itself had sensed something uncomfortable and was trying to smooth it over. Guests had returned to their conversations, but the energy had changed. There was a tension beneath the surface like a glass that had been cracked, but not yet shattered. Madison stood near the cake again, smiling for photographs, her posture flawless, her expression controlled. If anyone had missed what she said moments earlier, they would have seen only a radiant bride enjoying her perfect day. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. From a distance, they looked like exactly what they wanted the world to see. I paused just inside the doorway, not because I was uncertain, but because I was aware that whatever happened next would not just shift the atmosphere of the room, it would reveal something no one here was prepared to face. A few people noticed me. Their eyes flickered in my direction, then away. Some recognized the moment they had witnessed and chose silence again. That, I realized, was how cruelty survived so easily. Not just through those who spoke it, but through those who watched and did nothing. I walked forward, slowly, calmly. No rush, no anger on my face, just presence. At first, no one stopped me. Then halfway across the room, I saw Robert Blake. He was standing near the edge of the dance floor, speaking quietly with another guest. When his eyes found me, he went still. Something in my expression must have told him that whatever he had suspected before was about to become real. He excused himself immediately and took a step toward me. Mrs. Hill, he began. Chloe, I corrected gently. He nodded, but his gaze had already shifted past me, to the doors. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I heard it, the subtle change in the room, the quieting of voices, the way attention moves like a ripple when someone important enters a space. Footsteps, measured, confident. And then a voice behind me. Mrs. Hill. I turned. Edward Grant stood just inside the ballroom, dressed in a dark suit that carried the kind of understated precision only very powerful men seem to understand. Beside him stood Karen Lewis, her posture straight, her expression composed a folder held neatly in her hands. Edward didn't look at Madison. He didn't look at Daniel. He didn't look at the guests who were now watching him with growing curiosity. He looked at me, and he smiled not broadly, not theatrically, but with quiet respect. I apologize for the timing, he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those closest to us. But I believe you asked me to come in. Yes, I replied. Robert stepped forward, his expression tight. Edward Grant, he said, disbelief and recognition mixing in his voice. Edward inclined his head slightly. Mr. Blake! The room shifted again. Names like Edward Grant don't pass through conversations unnoticed. They linger. They spread. Within seconds, the whispering began. That's him, isn't he? The investor, Madison turned. At first, her expression held polite curiosity. Then recognition hit. She straightened, smoothing her dress instinctively, her smile returning as if pulled into place by habit. "Mr. Grant!" she said, stepping forward. "I wasn't expecting you tonight, but this is Edward," didn't move toward her. He didn't return her smile. He remained exactly where he was, beside me. And that was when the room understood. Something wasn't right. Madison's smile faltered just slightly. "I assume you're here regarding Lumière, she continued, her voice still controlled. "We can schedule a proper meeting next week. Tonight is the acquisition closed this morning," Edward said calmly. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Madison blinked. "Yes," she said quickly. "I'm aware. We finalized the agreement with the investment group. I was told the principal investor preferred to remain anonymous." Her eyes flickered across the room as if searching for someone. Then back to Edward. "Perhaps you could introduce us." Edward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward me. The silence stretched. Not long, but long enough. And then clearly, without raising his voice, he said, "Mrs. Hill is the principal investor." Everything stopped. Not in the dramatic way people imagine. Not with gasps or shouts, but with something quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it difficult to breathe. Madison stared at him, then at me, then back at him. "I'm sorry," she said, a small laugh, escaping, brittle and sharp. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't," Karen Lewis said, stepping forward and opening the folder in her hands. All controlling shares of Lumière Belle Cosmetics were transferred this morning to Hill Legacy Capital. Mrs. Chloe Hill is the majority stakeholder. The words were precise, unemotional, final. Madison's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice was louder now, strained. "I would know if." "You signed the agreements," Karen replied calmly. "Your legal team reviewed the documents. The clause regarding leadership restructuring was clearly outlined." Madison shook her head. No, this is a joke. This is some kind of..." "It's not a joke," Edward said. Daniel stepped forward then. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain, almost unrecognizable. I turned to him. For the first time since the cake table, I looked directly into his eyes. "I didn't want this to happen here," I said quietly. "Not today." His expression shifted confusion shock, something deeper beginning to form beneath the surface. You're the investor?" he asked. I held his gaze. "Yes." Behind him, Madison let out a sharp breath. "This is insane," she said. "You're telling me that she gestured towards me, her hand trembling slightly, that she owns my company." "Saved it," Edward corrected. "There is a difference." Robert stepped forward, his face pale. "Edward," he said, his voice tight, "are you saying my daughter no longer controls Lumière Belle?" Edward met his eyes steadily. "I'm saying the company would not exist in 6 months without intervention. Mrs. Hill provided that intervention." Robert's shoulders dropped slightly, not in defeat, in understanding. He turned to Madison. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. Madison didn't answer. She was still staring at me, but now the look in her eyes had changed. It wasn't superiority anymore. It wasn't dismissal. It was something else. Something colder. Fear. "I don't understand," Daniel said, stepping closer to me. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question cut deeper than I expected. Not because of what he asked, but because of what he didn't. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't say, "What she said to you was wrong." He asked about the money. I took a slow breath. "Because I didn't want you to love me for it," I said. The words hung between us. Simple, honest, painfully clear. Behind him, Madison found her voice again. "You did this on purpose," she said, stepping forward, her composure cracking. "You waited. You let me." She stopped. But the rest of the sentence didn't need to be spoken. "You let me humiliate you." I met her gaze. "I didn't expect you to do that." I said, and that was the truth. I had expected distance, coldness, even quiet disrespect. But not that. Not in front of a room full of people. Not with such certainty that she would never face consequences. The room was no longer pretending. People were watching openly now, listening, waiting for the next move. And for the first time since the wedding began, Madison Blake was no longer the center of control. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a room holding its breath. The music had faded into something faint and irrelevant. Conversations had stopped entirely, now replaced by a thick, waiting silence. Every eye seemed to move between me, Madison, and Edward, as if trying to piece together a story none of them had expected to witness. Madison was the first to break that silence. "No," she said, shaking her head as if she could undo reality by refusing to accept it. "No, this doesn't make sense. I would have known. My legal team, my board, they would have told me." Karen Lewis closed the folder in her hands with quiet precision. "They did," she replied. The documentation was sent, reviewed, and signed. The terms were clear. Hill Legacy Capital now holds the controlling interest. Madison's eyes darted around the room, searching for someone to contradict her. "Danielle," she said sharply, turning to him, "tell them this is insane!" Daniel didn't speak. He looked at me, then at Edward, then back at Madison. And for the first time since I'd known her, Madison looked uncertain. "What exactly are you saying?" Daniel asked slowly, his voice unsteady. That, Mom, that she owns your company." I exhaled quietly. "Not owns it the way you're thinking," I said. "But yes, I'm the majority stakeholder now." Madison let out a bitter laugh. "This is unbelievable," she said. "You're telling me the woman who shops at discount stores and wears the same cardigan to every dinner is suddenly some kind of secret investor. The words were meant to sting. But they didn't land the way she intended anymore, because now everyone in the room was hearing them for what they truly were. Not clever, not subtle, just cruel." Edward's expression hardened slightly. "Mrs. Blake," he said, his tone polite but firm, "Mrs. Hill's personal choices have nothing to do with her financial decisions." Madison ignored him. She stepped closer to me. "You set this up," she said. "You waited until today, until my wedding to reveal this. You wanted to humiliate me." Her voice was louder now, edged with something sharp and desperate. I met her gaze without raising my own voice. "I didn't want to reveal anything today," I said. "I intended to remain anonymous." "Then why didn't you?" she demanded. I paused. For just a moment, then I answered honestly, "Because you gave me a reason not to." The words settled into the room like a quiet verdict. Madison froze, and for the first time I saw it clearly. She understood. Not everything, but enough. Enough to realize that the moment at the cake table had changed everything. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his composure unraveling. "Mom," he said again, softer now, almost pleading, "why didn't you tell me all these years? You had this kind of money, and you never said anything." I looked at him, really looked, at the man he had become, at the boy I had raised, and at the distance between those two versions of him. "I wanted you to build your life on your own," I said. "I didn't want you to make choices based on what I had." I wanted you to know who you were without it. Daniel swallowed, and now he asked. Now it just appears like this. It didn't just appear, I replied gently. It's been there, quietly, the same way I've always been there for you. He flinched slightly at that. Behind him, Madison scoffed. This is ridiculous, she said. Even if what you're saying is true, you can't just walk in and take over my company. Karen stepped forward again. Actually, she can, she said. The terms you agreed to included provisions for leadership review in the event of financial instability or ethical concerns. Madison's head snapped toward her. Ethical concerns, she repeated. What does that even mean? Karen's expression remained neutral. It means there have been multiple internal reports regarding your management style, financial decisions, and treatment of employees. That's not. Madison started, then stopped, because she knew, maybe not every detail. But enough! Those are disgruntled employees, she said quickly. Every company has them. Some do, Edward replied. But patterns matter, and in this case, the pattern was significant enough to require intervention. Madison turned to her father. Dad, say something, she said, her voice cracking slightly. You know how this works. You know this isn't right. Robert Blake had been silent for most of the exchange. Now he stepped forward, slowly, carefully. He looked at Madison, then at me, then at Edward. And when he spoke, his voice was steady but heavy. How serious are the company's financial issues, he asked. Madison stared at him. You're taking their side, she said. I'm asking a question, he replied. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, the answer became clear. Robert closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Madison, he said quietly, did you review the agreements before signing them? I had people for that, she snapped. That's not what I asked. Silence. Robert nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something he had already begun to suspect. Details matter, he said, echoing his words from the night before. Madison shook her head. This isn't happening, he said. This is my company. I built it. You built part of it, Edward said, and you nearly lost all of it. The words were not cruel, but they were final. Daniel stepped back slightly, his eyes moving between all of us. I don't understand, he said. Why here? Why today? I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not anymore. Just a deep, quiet sadness. I didn't choose today, I said. I chose to stay silent, to let this be handled privately. Then why isn't it, he pressed. I held his gaze, and this time I didn't soften the truth. Because when she spoke to me, I said, my voice steady, you heard it, and you said nothing. The room seemed to shrink, not physically, but emotionally. Daniel's face went pale. He started, but the words didn't come, because there were no words that could undo that moment. Madison let out a sharp breath. Oh, come on, she said. You're really going to make this about that? It was one comment. I turned to her. One comment, I repeated. She crossed her arms. Yes, people say things. It's not the end of the world. No, I said quietly. It isn't. I took a step closer. But it shows who you are when you think there are no consequences. She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. Because now there were consequences, and everyone could see them. Karen adjusted the folder in her hands. Mrs. Blake, she said, as of this morning, a formal review of your position as CEO has been initiated. Based on current findings, it is likely that the board will move to replace you. The words hung in the air. Clear. Unavoidable. Madison stared at her. You can't do that, she said. We can, Karen replied, and we will if necessary. Robert looked at his daughter, something like grief passing across his face. Madison, he said softly, this didn't have to happen like this. She didn't answer him. She was still looking at me, but now there was no superiority left in her expression, no dismissal, only the realization that everything she thought she controlled had shifted beneath her feet, and that the woman she had tried to make invisible was the one holding the power she had underestimated. The silence that followed Karen's words felt heavier than anything that had come before. Not loud, not chaotic, just final. Madison stood frozen, her shoulders stiff. Her hands clenched at her sides as if she were holding onto something invisible that was slipping away. For the first time since I had known her, she didn't have a response ready. No clever remark, no polished deflection, no controlled smile, just shock. And behind that shock, fear. Robert Blake took a slow step forward, not as a businessman, not as a man protecting his daughter's reputation, but as a father trying to understand where things had gone wrong. Madison, he said quietly, look at me. She didn't. Her eyes were still fixed on me as though I were the center of everything that had just unraveled. Madison, he repeated more firmly. This time she turned. What? She snapped, her voice brittle. Robert didn't react to the tone. Instead, he held her gaze with a calm that seemed to come from years of experience, of success, of failure, of watching people build and destroy their own lives. Did you say what they're saying? You said, he asked. She blinked. What does that even matter right now? She replied. It matters, he said. Answer the question. Her jaw tightened. People are exaggerating, he said. It was nothing, a comment taken out of context. Robert didn't move. Did you call her a fat pig? He asked. The words sounded different coming from him. Heavier, stripped of the casual cruelty Madison had wrapped them in. For a second, Madison hesitated, and in that hesitation, the truth was already there. Yes, she said finally, her chin lifting slightly. But Robert raised a hand, not to silence her harshly, just enough to stop her from continuing. That's all I needed to hear, he said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because the disappointment in it was louder than anger could ever be. Linda Blake stepped forward, then her expression tight with irritation rather than concern. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said. Are we really going to tear everything apart? Over one sentence, weddings are stressful. People say things they don't mean. Robert turned to her slowly. She meant it, he said. Linda frowned. You don't know that. I do, he replied. Because I've watched her for years. The room seemed to lean in again. Not for drama, but for truth. Robert looked back at Madison. I warned you, he said. More than once, I told you that how you treat people matters, that success doesn't excuse cruelty. Madison's eyes flashed. I am not cruel, she said. Robert didn't flinch. You just were, he replied. The simplicity of it landed harder than any accusation. Madison's composure cracked further. You're taking her side, she demanded, gesturing toward me again. You don't even know her. Robert's gaze softened just slightly. I don't need to know everything about her, he said. I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. He paused, then added more quietly, and I know what kind of woman I raised. The words hung between them, not as an insult, but as a reckoning. Madison's breath caught. For a moment, she looked like a child again, cornered, defensive, desperate to be right. Then her expression hardened. This is unbelievable, she said. Everyone's acting like I committed some kind of crime. She's been judging me from the moment we met. Acting like she's better than me just because she's older. I never acted like that, I said gently. She turned on me immediately. Yes, you did, she insisted. All those quiet looks. That way you pretend to be above everything. It's condescending. I shook my head. I wasn't pretending to be above anything, I said. I was trying to stay out of your way. That's exactly what I mean, she snapped. You made everything uncomfortable. You didn't fit, and you expected us to adjust to you. Her words were sharp, but now they revealed more about her than about me. You're right, I said softly. I didn't fit into your world. Madison let out a bitter laugh. Finally, something we agree on. But that doesn't give you the right to humiliate me, I continued. The laughter died on her lips, and it doesn't give anyone else the right to pretend it didn't happen. My eyes moved briefly to Daniel. He flinched. Robert followed my gaze. Slowly, he turned to Daniel. You heard it? He asked. Daniel swallowed hard. Yes, he said. And you said nothing. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Daniel looked at the floor. I didn't know what to do, he said quietly. Robert's expression didn't soften. You always know what to do, he said. You just didn't want to do it. Daniel's head lifted, pain flashing across his face. That's not fair, he said. No, Robert replied. Then tell me what stopped you. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I didn't want to make a scene, he said, finally. Robert nodded once. So you let someone else be the scene instead. The words struck deeper than anything else that had been said, because they were true. Daniel ran a hand over his face. I thought it would pass, he said. I thought it wasn't worth respect is always worth it, Robert interrupted. Silence fell again. This time it was different. Not tense, not expectant, just clear. The truth was no longer hidden behind politeness or distraction. It stood in the middle of the room, undeniable. Robert turned back to me. For a moment, he simply looked at me. Not as a stranger, not as an obstacle, but as a person he had misjudged by association. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't? I began. I do, he said firmly. Not for the business. That's separate. But for this. He gestured slightly toward the space where everything had unfolded. For what my daughter said to you, and for what I allowed myself to overlook before today. His words were measured, sincere, and they carried a weight that made them meaningful. I nodded. Thank you, I said. That was enough. Robert exhaled slowly. Then he turned back to Madison. What happens next? He said is up to you. Madison stared at him. What's that supposed to mean? It means you can continue fighting reality, he replied. Or you can face it. Her eyes flicked toward Karen. Towards Edward. Toward me. And what exactly am I supposed to do, she demanded. No one answered immediately, because the answer was obvious, and also difficult. Robert spoke first. You start by acknowledging what you did, he said. Not minimizing it. Not justifying it. Madison's lips pressed together. And then you decide who you want to be, he said. The simplicity of it made it harder, because there was no strategy in those words. No negotiation. Just choice. Madison looked around the room, at the guests who were still watching, at the life she had built, at the control she had lost. And for a brief moment, I thought she might do it, that she might step forward, that she might say the words. But then her expression shifted, not toward humility, but toward defiance. I don't need to prove anything to anyone, she said. Robert closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. No, he said quietly, but you're going to have to live with what you've shown. The truth settled over the room like a final layer. Not dramatic, not explosive, just real. And in that reality, everything had changed. For a moment after Robert's words, no one moved. It was as if the room itself had reached a point where everything that needed to be revealed had already been laid bare. The tension no longer crackled. It settled heavy and undeniable, pressing down on each person in a different way. Madison was the first to break again. Fine, she said sharply, throwing her hands slightly into the air. You all want honesty. Let's have honesty. Her voice rose, not screaming, but loud enough to fill the room without effort. Yes, I said it. Yes, I called her that. And yes, maybe I shouldn't have. But let's not pretend this is just about one sentence. She turned directly toward me, her eyes blazing now. You've been judging me since day one, she continued, standing there in your quiet little way, acting like you're above everything, like you're some kind of moral authority. I began. You did, she cut in. You just hid it better. The words hit the air, but they didn't carry the same power they once might have, because now everyone had context. Everyone had seen. Madison wasn't exposing something hidden. She was revealing herself. I built something, she went on, her voice tightening. I worked for it. I sacrificed for it. And now you walk in with your secret money and your quiet little investment games, and you take it from me. I didn't take it from you, I said calmly. I kept it from collapsing. Her laugh was sharp and humorless. That's what you tell yourself so you can feel righteous about it. No, I replied. That's what the numbers say. Karen stepped forward slightly, her presence steady. The financial reports are clear, she said. Without intervention, the company would not have survived the next fiscal year. Madison didn't look at her. She kept her focus on me. You think this makes you better than me? She demanded. No, I said quietly. Then what does it make you? She shot back. I held her gaze. Responsible, I said. That word landed differently. Not as an attack, but as a contrast. Madison's expression twisted. Oh, please, she scoffed. You're hiding behind that. This is personal, and you know it. I didn't deny it. Today became personal, I said, because you made it that way. Her mouth opened, closed. For a moment, she didn't have a response. Then she turned abruptly to Daniel. Are you seriously just standing there? She demanded. Say something. Daniel looked like a man pulled in two directions at once. His hands hovered at his sides, unsure of where to go. He started, then stopped. Madison stepped closer to him. Daniel, she said, her voice softening just enough to sound intimate. This is your wedding day. Our wedding day? Are you really going to let this turn into something else? He looked at her, then at me, then back at her. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Then let me help you, she said quickly. Tell them this is out of line. Tell them your mother had no right to do this here like this. Her words were persuasive, familiar. The same tone she had used for months. The one that guided, nudged, reshaped. For a second, I saw Daniel begin to lean toward it, toward the easier path, the one that required no confrontation, no accountability, just alignment. But something had changed. Something had already broken open inside him. I can't do that, he said quietly. Madison froze. What? I can't say that, he repeated a little more firmly. Because it's not true. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Madison's eyes widened. "Excuse me," she said. Daniel took a breath. "She didn't do anything wrong," he said. "Not today. Not with the company. She didn't even want to say anything here." "Then why is this happening?" Madison demanded. "Because of what you said," he answered. The words hung there. Simple. Direct. Unavoidable. Madison's expression hardened again. "Oh, so now you're blaming me?" she snapped. "I'm not blaming you," he said. I'm acknowledging what happened." Her laugh came again, sharper this time. "Oh, ow," she said. "That's impressive. It only took your entire wedding falling apart for you to find your voice." The sarcasm stung, but Daniel didn't retreat. "Not this time. I should have said something earlier," he admitted. I felt my chest tighten, not from pain, from recognition. This was the truth I had been waiting for. Not perfection, not instant redemption, just truth. Madison shook her head, disbelief turning into anger. "You're choosing her," she said. Daniel frowned. "This isn't about choosing sides." "It is," she insisted. "It always is. And right now, you're standing there defending her instead of me." He hesitated, and in that hesitation, the weight of everything they had built together seemed to balance on a single point. "I'm not defending what you did," he said finally. Madison's breath caught. "Unbelievable," she whispered, then louder. "After everything I've done for you, after everything we've built, this is how you show up." Daniel's voice didn't rise, but it steadied. "What we built shouldn't require me to ignore something like that." He said. The room was completely still now. Even the background music had stopped. Or maybe I just couldn't hear it anymore. Madison looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "This is really happening," she said slowly. "You're actually doing this." Daniel didn't answer, because there was nothing left to explain. Madison turned away from him abruptly, then back again, as if searching for something, anything, to regain control. But the control was gone, and she could feel it. "You know what?" she said, her voice tightening. "Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe it's better to see this now." She looked at me again, at the room, at the situation she could no longer manage. "I don't need this," she said. "I don't need to stand here and be judged by people who don't understand what it takes to build something real." "No one is judging you for building something," I said gently. Her eyes flashed. "They're judging me for how I do it." "Yes," I said. The honesty of that answer hit harder than anything else. Madison went still. For a moment, she looked like she might say something else, something sharper, something final. But instead she laughed, a short, hollow sound. "This is ridiculous," she said. "All of it." She turned back to Daniel one last time. "If you walk away from me over this," she said, "you're making the biggest mistake of your life." Daniel didn't move, didn't speak, didn't reach for her, and in that silence, the answer was already there. Madison held his gaze for a second longer. Then she stepped back, and something between them, something that had seemed so certain just hours before, finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. For a few seconds after Madison's last words, no one moved. The kind of silence that filled the room wasn't awkward anymore. It was decisive. Something had ended, and everyone could feel it, even if no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Madison stood there waiting, not for understanding, not for compromise, but for Daniel to stop her, to reach for her, to choose her. He didn't. His hands stayed at his sides, fingers slightly curled, as if holding back something he no longer trusted himself to offer. "I'm sorry," he said finally. The words were quiet, not performative, not loud enough to reclaim the room. Just real. Madison blinked. "That's it," she said. "That's all you have to say." Daniel swallowed. "I'm sorry," he repeated, "but I can't keep pretending this is okay." Her lips parted slightly. For a moment, it looked like she might argue again, but something in his voice stopped her. Not strength, not anger, but clarity. And clarity is harder to fight than emotion. "You're really doing this?" she said, her voice almost a whisper now. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the truth had already settled between them. Madison let out a slow breath, then straightened her posture. If she was going to lose control, she would not do it quietly. "Fine," she said, her voice rising again, sharp enough to cut through the stillness. "Then let's be clear about what's happening here." She turned not just to Daniel, but to the entire room. "This isn't about respect," she said. "This is about power." She waited until she had leverage, and then she used it. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, because the accusation wasn't entirely false, but it also wasn't complete. I stepped forward. "I didn't wait for leverage," I said calmly. "I waited for a reason." Madison laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "Oh, please," she said. "Don't pretend this is noble. You saw an opportunity and you took it." I met her gaze. "I saw a company that needed help," I said. "And I saw people inside it who deserved better than what they were getting." Her expression hardened. "You don't know anything about my company." "I know enough," I replied. "Enough to know that leadership is not just about vision. It's about responsibility." She scoffed. "And you think you're the one to teach me that?" "No," I said quietly. "I think you're the one who needs to learn it." The words didn't come from anger. They came from something steadier. Something that had been forming long before this day. Madison opened her mouth, then stopped. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then it vanished, replaced by defiance. "You can take the company," she said. "You can sit in your quiet little office and make decisions with your fancy investors, but don't act like that makes you better than me." "I don't need to act," I said. The room went still again. Because now it wasn't just about the company. It was about something deeper. Madison's identity, her control, her image, and the fact that all of it was slipping. Karen Lewis stepped forward slightly, her presence bringing the conversation back to something more concrete. "Mrs. Blake," she said, as previously stated, "the board will be conducting a formal review of your position effective immediately." Madison turned toward her sharply. "You don't get to decide that tonight." "The process has already begun," Karen replied. "Tonight simply made it visible," Edward Grant added, his voice calm but firm. "There are documented concerns that predate today. This is not a reaction, it's a continuation." Madison's gaze moved between them, her breathing uneven now. "You're pushing me out," she said. "We're protecting the company," Edward corrected. "And what about me?" she demanded. No one answered immediately, because that question had no simple answer. Finally, Robert spoke. "What happens to you?" he said quietly. "Depends on what you do next." Madison turned to him, frustration and disbelief mixing in her expression. "You're just going to stand there," she said. "You're not going to fight this." Robert's face softened, but his voice remained steady. "Oh, I spent years building something of my own," he said. "And I learned that when you cross certain lines, there are consequences you can't argue your way out of." Her eyes filled not with tears, but with something close to them. "I didn't do anything that bad," she said. Robert didn't look away. "You humiliated someone in public," he said. "Someone who showed you nothing but patience." "She was judging me," Madison insisted. "That doesn't justify cruelty," he replied. The simplicity of his answer left no room for negotiation. Madison looked back at me. For the first time, there was no mask. No practiced confidence, just a woman facing the collapse of everything she thought she controlled. "You think this makes you strong?" she said quietly, standing there taking everything from me. I shook my head. "This isn't about taking," I said. "It's about not giving power to someone who uses it to hurt others." Her lips trembled slightly, just enough to show the crack beneath the surface. "I worked for that power," she said. "I know," I replied. "And now it's gone," she whispered. "Not gone," I said. "Changed." She looked at me confused. "You still have a choice," I continued. "Just not the one you thought you had." The words lingered, not as comfort, but as truth. Madison stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed again. But this time there was no sharpness in it, just exhaustion. "You really believe that she said?" "Yes," I answered. She shook her head slowly. "I don't," she said. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about losing a company. It was about losing the version of herself she had built. The one who controlled everything. The one who was always right. The one who never had to admit fault. And she didn't know how to exist without that. Karen closed her folder. "The formal notice will be delivered tomorrow," she said. "For now, we recommend you take the evening to process." Madison let out a breath. "Process," she repeated, as if the word itself were foreign. Robert stepped closer to her. "Madison," he said softly, "you don't have to handle this alone." She looked at him, really looked, and for a second something in her softened. Then it disappeared again. "I'm not alone," she said. "I just don't need help from people who don't understand me." She stepped back, away from him, away from me, away from the center of the room. The guests parted slightly as she moved, creating space without meaning to. Not out of fear, but out of uncertainty, because no one knew what came next. And for the first time in her life, neither did Madison Blake. The ballroom didn't return to what it had been. Even after Madison stepped away, even after the music cautiously resumed, and a few guests attempted to restart conversations, something fundamental had shifted. The laughter sounded thinner now. The smiles didn't quite reach people's eyes. Everyone was aware they had witnessed something, they wouldn't forget it. And neither would I. I stood where I was for a moment, longer, feeling the weight of everything settle, not just what had happened in the last hour, but everything that had led up to it. The months of quiet dismissal, the small cuts, the silence that had allowed them to grow. Edward leaned slightly toward me. "Would you like me to have the car brought around?" he asked quietly. His tone was respectful, not assuming. I appreciated that. In a moment, I said. He nodded. "Of course." Karen gave me a small professional nod as well, then stepped back, allowing space. Robert lingered for a second longer. "I'm sorry for how this unfolded," he said. "Not the business, but everything else." "I understand," I replied. "You didn't create this." He gave a slight tired smile. "No," he said, "but I should have seen it sooner." We held each other's gaze briefly, two people who had come to understand something important about each other far too late in the day. Then he stepped away. And suddenly, the space around me felt larger, quieter. Daniel was still there. He hadn't moved far. He stood near the edge of the dance floor, his shoulders slumped, his tie loosened slightly, his entire posture different from the man who had stood beside Madison just hours before. For a moment, he didn't approach. He simply watched me, as if unsure whether he was still allowed to. I made the choice for him. I walked towards him, each step measured, not cold, not rushed, just deliberate. When I reached him, we stood facing each other a few feet apart, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to feel the distance that had grown between us. "Mom," he said. The words sounded different, not automatic, not easy. "Careful." "Yes," I replied. He looked down for a moment, then back up. I don't know how to fix this," he said. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no excuses, just uncertainty. I took a slow breath. "You can't fix it," I said gently. His expression tightened. "Then what do I do?" he asked. "You understand it?" I said. "You take responsibility for it, and then you decide who you want to be going forward." He nodded slightly, though it was clear he didn't yet fully grasp what that meant. I should have said something, he said. Yes, I agreed. The word was simple, but it carried weight. He flinched slightly. I thought. He started, then stopped. "What?" I asked. "I thought it would pass," he admitted. "I thought if I didn't make a big deal out of it, it wouldn't become one." I watched him carefully. "That's not how respect works," I said. "It doesn't protect itself. People have to protect it." He swallowed. "I know that now." I nodded. "I believe you," I said. And I did. That was the complicated part. I believed he understood. But understanding didn't erase what had already happened. He took a small step closer. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. I looked at him. "I know," I replied. And that was true too. He hadn't intended harm, but intention didn't change the outcome. "What she said," he continued, his voice faltering, "it wasn't okay. And the fact that I didn't stop it, that's on me." "Yes," I said again. Another simple truth. He closed his eyes briefly as if absorbing it. "I've been trying to keep everything balanced," he said, "to make everyone happy. But I see now that I was just avoiding hard choices. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. You weren't balancing anything," I said gently. You were choosing comfort over truth." He opened his eyes, and this time he didn't look away. "I don't want to be that person," he said. "Then don't be," I replied. Silence settled between us again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was honest. He looked past me briefly toward the doors where Madison had disappeared. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer immediately, because that wasn't my decision to make. "That depends on what you choose next," I said finally. He nodded slowly. "I don't think I can go back to what it was," he said. "No," I agreed. "You can't." Another pause. Then he asked the question I had been waiting for. "Do you think you can forgive me?" There it was. Not wrapped in explanation, not softened. Just real. I took my time before answering, because this mattered. Not just for him. For me. Forgiveness isn't something I give to make you feel better, I said. It's something that grows when trust is rebuilt. He listened carefully. "I still love you," I continued. "That hasn't changed, but love doesn't mean I ignore what happened." He nodded, his eyes bright now. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" I asked softly. "Yes," he replied. "Or at least, I'm starting to." That was enough for now. Not resolution, but a beginning. "I'm going to leave," I said. He looked startled. So soon? There's nothing more for me here tonight, I said. That wasn't entirely true, but it was enough. He hesitated. Can I call you? He asked. I met his eyes. You can, I said, but not to pretend everything is okay. I won't, he promised. I believed he meant that. Whether he could follow through, that remained to be seen. I reached out then. Not to hug him, not yet, but to place my hand briefly on his arm. A small gesture, but a meaningful one. I'm proud of you for speaking up, said. His breath caught slightly. Even if it was late. He nodded. I'll do better, he said. I hope so, I replied. I let my hand fall. Then I stepped back, creating space again. Not distance, just space. I turned and walked toward the exit. This time, no one tried to stop me. No one called after me. The doors opened easily. Outside, the evening air was cooler, quieter, real. Edward was waiting near the curb. The car is ready, he said. Thank you, I replied. As I approached, I glanced back once. Through the glass doors, I could see the ballroom, the lights, the movement, the aftermath, and somewhere inside my son standing at the edge of a life that had just changed in ways he didn't fully understand yet. I didn't wave. I didn't go back. Because some moments don't need to be extended. They need to be honored for what they are. Turning points. I got into the car. As the door closed, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief, not exactly, but something close to it. A quiet certainty. I had not lost myself. Not in that room, not in that moment, not even in the silence that had hurt the most. And as the car pulled away, I realized something else. For the first time in a long time. I was not waiting to be seen. I already was. Time has a way of softening sharp edges, not erasing them, not pretending they never existed, but smoothing them enough that you can touch them without bleeding every time. 6 months after the wedding, my life looked different. Not dramatically, not in the way people imagine when they think of change. There was no grand transformation, no sudden shift into a completely new identity. I still lived in my small yellow house in Ohio. I still woke up early, made my coffee the same way, and sat by the window watching the quiet street come to life. I still wore my cardigans, still shopped carefully, still found comfort in simple routines, but inside, something had settled, something had realigned. I was no longer carrying the same weight I had before. Because I had finally put it down. The weeks after the wedding were not easy. For anyone. The story didn't stay contained within that ballroom. News travelled quickly, especially when business and reputation were involved. And the acquisition of Millionaire cosmetics became public within days. And with it came speculation articles, opinions from people who didn't know the full story, but felt entitled to comment anyway. Madison's name appeared in headlines. So did mine. Though I remained mostly private, those who needed to know knew. Hill Legacy Capital stepped forward in a controlled, professional way. Edward handled most of it. Karen ensured the legal structure remained solid. The company itself moved into a period of restructuring, quiet, careful, necessary. Employees who had once felt ignored began to speak more openly. Departments were reorganized. Financial decisions were reviewed and corrected. And slowly, Millionaire began to stabilize. Not as a reflection of Madison's ambition, but as a reflection of something more sustainable, more grounded. I did not take a public role. That was never my intention. Instead, I stayed in the background, making decisions when needed, guiding where necessary, and trusting the new leadership team we brought in to do the work properly. Madison was removed from her position as CEO within a month. The decision was not emotional. It was procedural, documented, supported by evidence that had existed long before the wedding day. Still, I would be lying if I said it didn't affect me. Not with guilt, but with awareness, because I understood something that many people in that situation do not. Losing power is not just about losing a position, it's about losing identity. And Madison had built hers around control. Without it, she had very little left to hold on to. I heard through Robert that she had withdrawn from most public engagements, that she was staying with a friend in New York, that she was reconsidering her next steps. Robert wrote to me once, a handwritten letter. He apologized again, not just for the wedding, but for the years he had overlooked signs in his daughter that now seemed obvious. I taught her how to succeed, he wrote, but I failed to teach her how to be kind when success came. I wrote back, not to absolve him, but to acknowledge the truth in his words. We spoke once briefly on the phone after that. There was no attempt to build a relationship, just mutual understanding, and sometimes that's enough. As for Daniel, that part was harder. Healing rarely happens in a straight line. The first few weeks after the wedding, he called often, too often. His voice filled with apologies, explanations, promises to change. I listened, but I didn't rush. I need time, I told him more than once. And I meant it. Because forgiveness, the real kind, doesn't come from words. It comes from consistency, from action, from showing up differently over and over again until the new pattern becomes real. So Daniel started doing that. Not perfectly, but sincerely. He found a therapist, not because I told him to, but because he realized he needed to understand why he had chosen silence for so long. He stopped making excuses for Madison, stopped trying to soften what had happened. When he spoke about it, he called it what it was. Wrong, he began writing to me. Letters at first. Actual letters. Handwritten, not long, not dramatic. Just honest. I'm learning that avoiding conflict doesn't keep peace, it just moves the damage somewhere else. I didn't realize how much I was letting someone else define what mattered. I'm trying to become someone you don't have to make excuses for. I kept every one of them, not because they erased the past, but because they showed me he was willing to face it. We didn't go back to Sunday dinners right away. We met in small ways, a coffee shop, a walk in the park, a quiet lunch. At first, the conversations were careful, measured, but slowly something began to rebuild. Not the old relationship. That one was gone. But something new. Something more honest, more equal. He no longer expected me to absorb his mistakes quietly, and I no longer pretended that everything was fine when it wasn't. We spoke about boundaries, about respect, about what it means to choose your actions even when they're uncomfortable. One afternoon, sitting across from me at a small cafe, he looked up and said, "I think I spent a long time confusing love with approval." I smiled slightly. "That's a common mistake," I said. "I don't want to make it again," he replied. I believed him, not because he said it, but because I'd watched him begin to live it. As for me, I found something unexpected in the months that followed. Freedom. Not from responsibility, not from care, but from the need to shrink. I no longer worried about fitting into someone else's version of what was acceptable. I no longer measured myself against the silent expectations of people who saw only surface. I had faced humiliation, and I had walked through it without losing myself. That changes a person. The brooch my mother's brooch remained with me. For a long time, I kept it tucked away. not hidden, just held. Then one evening, Edward mentioned a charity event, a fundraiser supporting women over 50 who had been pushed out of their careers, overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel invisible because of age or appearance. "Would you consider contributing something personal?" he asked. I thought about it for a long time, and then I brought the brooch, not as a loss, but as a continuation. At the event, I told its story, not dramatically, not for sympathy, just honestly, about my mother, about what she taught me, about what dignity looks like when no one is applauding. The brooch was auctioned. The final bid was higher than I expected, but the number didn't matter. What mattered was what it represented. A reminder that value is not defined by those who fail to see it. A reminder that what is dismissed in one room can be honored in another. After the event, a woman approached me. She was older, soft-spoken, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for mine. "Thank you," she said. I thought I was the only one who felt invisible. I squeezed her hand gently. "You're not," I said, and for the first time I understood something clearly. This wasn't just my story. It was shared, across generations, across rooms, across quiet moments where people are made to feel small. And the ending of my story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to Madison. It wasn't even about the company. It was about this: I did not become stronger because I had power. I became stronger because I stopped allowing anyone else to define my worth. And that is something no one can take away. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the silence of the people we love. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is this: love without respect will slowly teach you to doubt your own value. What happened to me that day wasn't just about one cruel sentence. It was about everything that sentence revealed: the quiet judgments, the small dismissals, the moments where I chose patience over boundaries and paid the price for it. But here is what I learned. You do not have to become loud to be strong. You do not have to become cruel to reclaim your dignity. And you do not have to stay where you are not respected, even if that place includes people you love. Real strength is quiet. It is the ability to stand in a room where you are being diminished and refuse to believe it. It is the courage to say, "This is not acceptable," even when your voice shakes. And it is the wisdom to understand that forgiveness does not mean returning to the same place where you were hurt. It means choosing yourself and allowing others to meet you there if they are willing to grow. So I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone close to you stayed silent while you were being hurt? What did you do? What do you wish you had done? Write it in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if this story spoke to you in any way, please like and subscribe. There are so many stories like this about family, about boundaries, about finding your voice again. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Because no matter where you are in the world, I want you to remember this: you are not invisible, and your worth does not depend on who sees it.